Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Arin Nurzalinda and my partner Rahayu Oktarini. And today we're going to explain about text and discourse. Next slide, please. Okay, before we talk about text and discourse, I will try to explain about what is text. Text is a trace of at least one utterance act, whether realized in terms of a verbal linguistic phrase or a non-verbal one, which may be gestural, sensory perceptual, or prosthetic. Then actually text divided into two. For the first, verbal, consisting of expressed in spoken words, what we are saying. So non-verbal, it's not sound like that. It's sign or notes of the head, wings, gas, directions, pointing gestures, raising of the eyebrows, and so on. Okay, text refers to the connected sequences of sign and signal under their conventional meanings produced by the speaker and in informal spoken interactions, signal of acknowledgement, approval, objections, and etc. By the address certain of which point to possible ways to grounding the discourse to be constructed within a particular context in cognitive terms. These signal correspondent what Gompers in 1992 calls that as contextualized cues. Okay. Here, the explanations and the definitions about context. Context is a conditions in which a situation occurs. Context is a part of descriptions that can support or add clarity to meaning of the situations relate to an event. There are several types of context. For the first, physical context include the rooms, real objects, scenery, and so on. Context refers to socio-psychological factors concerning factors such as the status of the people involved in the communications relationship, their role, and the level of seriousness. Next slide, please. Okay. Now I will try to explain about discourse. So discourse refers to the hierarchically structured, mentally represented product as a sequence of utterance, proportional, illocutionary, and indexical acts that the participants are jointly carrying out the communications unfolds. So actually in discourse, cohesion and coherence include in discourse. So what is cohesion? Cohesion, on the other hand, refers to the act forming a whole unit. It is effectively a subset of coherence. Picture cohesion and the break cements with the make up of the building. Then coherence is defined as the quality of being logical, consistent, and be able to understood. Imagine coherence as a building. It's an analogy. Go with it. Okay. Discourse clearly depends with text and the context. Next slide, please. Okay, here, text time in translations. According to Sager, text types develop as patterns of message for certain communicative situations. Okay, what distinguishes the main text type from each other is predominant functions of language, which has to be maintained in translation. In the informative text, which according to includes new text, business correspondence, instructions for use, official documents, technical text, scholarly articles, and like. The main functions of language is to inform the reader about objects and the phenomena in the real world. The choice of linguistic and stylist form is subordinate to these functions. This means that translator should attempt to give a correct and complete representations of the text content and be guided in terms of stylistic choice by the dominant norms of target language and culture. In the expressive text, which includes literary genre such as a novel, short stories, and poetry, the informative aspect in the implement or even overruled by aesthetic component. Next slide, please. Here, the characteristic of text type divide into three. Text type divide into informative, expressive, and operative. There are 5 characteristic of text type. For the first, language function, language dimension, text focus, text type should, and translation method. And informative represent the object and the facts, and must logical. Content focus only in the content. After that, transmit referential content and plain prose explanations as required. In expressive, it must expressing sender's attitude, must aesthetic, form focus, only focus in form, transmit aesthetic form, and identifying method, adopt perspective of other. In operative itself, is an appellative making an appeal to text receiver. It must dialogic, appellative focus only, and elicit desired response. After that, must adaptive with the equivalent of the effect. Next slide, please. Okay, text typology. Text typology is a very significant issue for a translator. It is often neglected by the specialist literature concerned with the translation studies. This might be the case because of the existence of the multiple text typologies based on the various criteria, as well as the fact that a text rarely displays features of only one particular subtype. And these three kinds of text typologies depend on situations. For the first, the text is uttered. That is the relationship between the participants in the communicative act and the time and the place of its utterance. The second one, typology is incommunicative. It involved in functions oriented. And the third, typologies that take into consideration the social sphere. The text is relayed, for instance, school, family, and etc. Next slide, please. Then the next slide will explain by Rahayu Oktarini. For Rahayu, time is yours.
Okay, thank you. In this slide, the point is what is register in translation. The first one, we are talking about what is register. Register is a variation of the language. So the occurrence of language variation is not only caused by the speakers who are not homogeneous, but also the activities or social interactions that happens in the community or people. It's very diverse. So the register is related to the language. Is used for what activity? What is being done and in what form or in what activity? We have to remember that because it will determine the choice of language to be used, determine the variation of the language itself. So the activities can affect the language selection, whether the people will use the formal language or use the informal language. For example, when doing a seminar or present assignment in the class, we will use the formal language. In the contrast, when we are talking with friends, actually we use informal language. So the register is a variation of language based on the domain. In other words, register is a variation of the language used based on the field of use, based on the style, level of community, social media, and so on. Therefore, register between one field and another have different terms in contrast. I have another example. The language spoken on radio and football commentator is certainly different. There are some terms that exist only in one field, but not in another. Beside terms, also has a different intonation. So we have to consider that what is activity, what job is it, for whom, because every job or every activity has its own language variations that we call register. Okay, text, genre, and discursive in translation. Translation shift can occur between source text and target text. Any deviation from formal correspondence or similarity in linguistic form in the target text as a result of the translation process and is called a translation shift. Translation shift was introduced by John Catford. In other words, translatorship occur when the translation of words and sentences in the text target is not a formal correspondence or linguistic form of words and sentences from the source text. Formal correspondence refers to the similarity of linguistic form, such as unit, class, or class word, structure, elements, and etc. The formal correspondence occur because the translator can sometimes find formal correspondence and sometimes they don't. So the translation process can result in shifting translation or not. Translation shift factors. Catford's 1965 states that difficulties in translation can be occur because the linguistic factors, and cultural factors. Textual equivalence. Textual equivalence occur when there is a difference in a formal correspondence. The translator will looking for the close to the target text, means that close natural equivalent. But the translators still have to pay attention to the context of the text language and culture of the source text. So the textual equivalence, looking for the meaning close to the target text. But message contents in the source text must be preserved in the target language, even though the form of search language cannot maintain in the target language. For example, search text is no smoking in text target means that dilarang merokok. A shift in translation. The translation is dilarang merokok is not the formal correspondence of no smoking yang seharusnya itu artinya tidak merokok. But dilarang merokok is called the textual equivalence, not change the meanings in the text. Okay, that's all about our presentation, text and discourse. Thanks for your attention. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.